PVC, Inclusion and Diversity, and also Deputy Dean for, I've got it, Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. So thank you for that, Kaushika, and also Deputy Dean for HLS. It's a great pleasure, Kaushika, to actually to hear you speak, and we very, very much look forward to your speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mamadou. It's a pleasure to be invited to speak at the conference today. And I hope my slides are up. There you go. I can see them, so I'm hoping you can. So let's just see if I can get this started. Excellent. Okay. So I was conscious of when I was putting this together, do a little dry run like we do, that I've probably written too many slides. So there'll be places where I slow down, there'll be places where I speed up, and I'm hoping somebody in the background, in the behind the scenes team, are going to give me a countdown when I'm running out of time. So good afternoon. Hope you all had a good lunch. I'm not sure whether this is the best slot when you've all had your lunch and a cup of tea and a cup of coffee and a chilling out on your chairs and sofas, and I hope I can keep you engaged and keep you awake. So my title, it's not just about the curriculum, the importance of decolonizing the whole institution and building an anti-racist university. So I very specifically and very purposefully use the title, it's not just about the curriculum, because there's often a lot of talk linked to decolonizing the curriculum. And I want to take this opportunity to understand why we need to move beyond that, not to ignore it, not to displace it, but just to move beyond that, to incorporate a much broader perspective. So what I intend to do over the next 25 minutes or so is to look back at why we've got to Decolonizing DMU. And for those of you who don't know, I'll do a very small look backwards into Freedom to Achieve. And then I'll move onwards and look into Decolonizing DMU as we are moving into now. I will take a moment to talk about the curriculum because it is important. It is a key facet of the decolonizing work. And then we'll move beyond that, beyond the curriculum. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what Decolonizing DMU has been up to 1 year on. We launched in November 2019. And as you know, very soon after, COVID hit us all. And then right towards the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about the risks and hopes about decolonization. And then finally will be opportunities. I'll outline some opportunities in how you can engage with the project and influence it, and then ways that you can see what we're doing and contact us as a team. So let's take us backwards to about 2016-17. Every now and again, usually about between October to December, the headlines are full in all the papers and all our sector press about the awarding gap, or in those days it was called the attainment gap. We've changed the language to awarding gap, and the press every year, it was cyclical. Every year you'd see this, the awarding gap. Can universities shame in unpicking the Black attainment gap? The question of two contrasting gaps in Black students' achievement. So you've got Black students who are more likely than white ones to attend university, but less likely to do well once enrolled. And there was all these conversations around the awarding gap, but you saw it every year. I mean, I'd been in academia for a number of years, 10 years before I started doing this work, and it was the same thing every year. The research didn't enable us to move beyond and forwards. So we were invited by Kingston University to work with them on a bid with the Office for Students, who was HEFCE at that time, for some money with 5 other institutions. So there were 6 of us in total, to look at the awarding gap and to look at the disparities and look at why the awarding gap was there, and to use some of the tools that Kingston had developed to see how they would translate into other universities. And what we did at De Montfort is we engaged with that project, and we called our project Freedom to Achieve. And one of the things that we were really keen to do was to ensure that we gathered our evaluation, looked at the impact, because we wanted to know what would come after this. We were tired of doing little bits of projects and not seeing what came next. I'll come back to the rest of those steps later. So Freedom to Achieve had a number of facets to it. We looked at something called the value-added metrics. So historically, the rationale that was provided for the awarding gap or the attainment gap was always centered on something that the sector became used to calling the student deficit model. So what it looked at was what was it about the student that prevented them from being able to get a good award? What was it about the BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic student population who had that gap Varying degrees within that, Black students had a much bigger gap than, say, Indian students, but the gap was still there. And the gap I'm talking about between white students and the BAME population of students. What is it? What is this student deficit model? And is that the actual reason behind it? So the value added metrics which Kingston created allowed us to baseline for the sorts of things people talked about, the qualifications the students did, the subjects that they studied, the subjects that they came to university to study, being first generation in their family going to university. So it allowed us to kind of measure for a whole range of different factors. And it allowed us to look at whether it was those factors. And that metric actually demonstrated that it wasn't those factors. It was much more the environment around them and what they were learning. Kingston had developed the inclusive curriculum framework, and we embedded that into universal design for learning. We ran workshops for staff, and we focused on, because it was a pilot, we focused on 10 programs per faculty. So we worked with 40 programs. We created good practice case studies that are available on our website. But the most important things for me was we ran co-creation workshops for staff and students in those programs. And we used those workshops and the evaluation of those to kind of look at what our next steps are going to be. And what those showed were pretty much what we understood in terms of it's not the student deficit model. What students talked about and what they felt needed to be different to enable them to feel confident in what they were doing, to enable them to achieve the outcomes that they wanted. So to be able to bring their whole self into learning, the whole self out to university to get the best results that they felt that they should do. So the things that came out, teaching and learning on that first block, you'll see teaching and learning is there. There's cultural examples in your lectures, learning resources and cultural diversity. That's the curriculum element. And I will come back to that. But you can see around that, there are the other elements. So we've got relationships, the importance of role models, the importance of having student integration. So all of our students learning about and from each other, but being able to see yourself reflected in the people teaching you or the people who have graduated from the university to be able to go on and to do the sorts of things that you want to do. But also within that was that sense of belonging. Do I belong in this university? Does this university look like me? Are there people here that look like me? Do I feel comfortable here? Can I engage? And then the students talked about support. So we've got some fantastic support, learning services, welfare services. We do a great job. But what the students were saying is it culturally relevant to the support that I need? Is there an understanding of who I am and what my journey has been to get into university? Because if there isn't, and I'm struggling, I'm not quite sure whether I can go and approach those spaces. We do a fantastic job with employability, and that was one of the areas our students said that they wanted more of, because we do engage with our alumni. We do bring students the opportunity to see where they could go. But we asked them about exclusion. What was it that might be the trigger that results in them dropping out of university, or what they think might be the reasons why they don't do as well or don't feel comfortable in doing as well? And it came back again to that sense of belonging and whether they felt that they belonged. And interestingly, one of the things they said was the perception of inherent white culture. Now, we're a university with almost 50% of our student population who are Black, Asian, minority ethnic. We have I think at the moment, 19 to 20% of our staff who are Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff. And we in a city, which is one of the majority populations of BAME communities. So to hear that from students was quite interesting. When we explored that with them, a lot of that focused on who was teaching them, who was in the classrooms, what did the leadership of the university look like? Was it representative? And yes, what were they being taught? Did they recognize what they were? Did they recognize themselves in what they were learning? So that, coming back to the steps that I showed you at the beginning, that then helped us to see that this is much bigger than the curriculum. It's much broader than looking at decolonizing just the curriculum. And we needed to look at the whole institution approach, decolonizing the whole of our university. So when the project launched in November 2019, the team spent a lot of time trying to construct what that would look like and how we would talk about that. So we came up with a working definition, and you'll see at the bottom of this slide, it still says working definition, because I think it can only be a working definition because it's fluid. As we learn and understand and members of our community, staff and students engage, this will continue to be reviewed and considered. But I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes on this, and I've highlighted some points in bold there, really, because we've had lots of debates and conversations over the year with people across our institution, with students, our staff, and with our partners in the community and other universities, because there's a lot of debate about the language of decolonizing. There's a lot of debate about where the racial inequalities come from, and is it true to say it comes from colonialism? Is it true to censor it like that? Is it correct to censor it like that? So I just wanted to draw the eye to racial inequality in Britain originates from colonialism. Now, we've put that context in there. There's a lot of writing around that. There's people who disagree. There's people who agree. And that's fine, because that starts that conversation. That's what we want, the starting of that conversation. But we did that because what we wanted to do was we wanted it to be recognized that racial inequality is a structural issue. Of course, it is an individual issue. We know that. We see incidents of individual racism. But for the purposes of what we're trying to dismantle here, we wanted it to shift the burden and the conversation away from one of deficit, blame, and shame. We wanted people to be able to recognize that racial inequality has been built on the centuries of dominant Western and Northern hemispheres, so that we could have those conversations to look at our structures and break them down. We wanted it to be understood that systems that were created, hierarchies, behaviors, they all failed to recognize the rich history, the world contributions of the global majority. So that's why we put that context. And it's not always been popular with people, and that's fine. Like I said, we have the conversation. Now, the scale of the challenge runs deep, as I've said, because what it means is we have to examine our everyday norms, what we do in the university, why and how. But the most important thing about this work is that we work collectively with respect and dignity. We have our views and we have to have the conversations, but it's the respect and dignity and collective working that's key. I thought it was important to spend a few minutes on that. I'm going to go back very briefly to looking at the curriculum. There's been a spurt of interest in looking at decolonizing the curriculum. It's been happening for a long time, but there are lots and lots more initiatives coming on board. These are just an example of a few. But looking into this, the calls for decolonizing the curriculum come from a space where students and academics are recognizing that the content of university knowledge remains centered in Eurocentric foundations, that the knowledge that's imparted centers the global north as the norm. Now, that's not necessarily done consciously, but it's done because that's what we've learned. That's how we've learned. And as I unpick my own practice, I'm recognizing that in my own practice. And writers of the global north are seen as creators of true knowledge. Now, the calls from students came about as to why is my curriculum white, and started those conversations. But then that led on to, well, why isn't my professor black? The conversation about who's teaching me? Am I represented? Is the global majority represented? Who are our leaders? And many of you will have heard of the Rhodes Must Fall Oxford campaign. I put Oxford in there because Rhodes Must Fall started in South Africa. But they asked a really pertinent question. What is excluded from my curriculum? By whom and why? And what is the purpose of my education, therefore? And I thought that was really interesting. And as Gabrielle says, that the purpose of our education system to perpetuate the existing power structures and norms, so everything that we're learning, or is it to equip our students with those critical tools to question what they're learning? And they further go on to make those connections between those knowledge gaps of the knowledge of the global majority, and they connect that with the structural and material inequalities that engender both within our academy and external to it. So it's really important to recognize that the decolonizing movement, it needs to understand it's about live issues of inequality, of colonialism and oppression. It's not just or solely about matters of legacy or unearthing historical accounts. Of course, that's important. Of course, we need to understand what we're learning and why. We look backwards, we look at the legacies, but we look at all of the legacies, not of a particular group only, but it's contexted in our real lives, what is current and important to our students as well. So, the racial inequalities of COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, have really put a spotlight on this activity. But I think it's really important to say about the university, the kind of work that we're doing, what we have is the opportunity we have to look at where we are now. So they've put here, dig where you are and where you have access. So in our university, we have that opportunity to look at what we're doing and why. But what we have to understand is that the university is not the main space where the transformation happens, because it's actually us as transformative forces as we enter into those university spaces. It's for us as the people who can and who should be the ones that make those changes. We're the ones who can connect what's happening in our societies, the inequalities, to what our students learn, to learning about the global majority and looking at our institution and making sure that the balances are right for all of our students. Okay, I'm very conscious of time now. So important thing is the decolonizing approach is not just a pedagogic approach. I know it's a teaching and learning conference, but this is not just a pedagogic approach. And it suggests that we need to be looking at being, thinking, knowing, sensing, feeling, doing, and living. And for me, that fits really nicely back to the evaluation that we did with our staff and students from our first 40 program cohorts. It all links very neatly in there. So when we moved on from Freedom to Achieve, we did a survey at the end, and you can see the numbers there, and you can see that we summarized the 6 themes, and they are the themes that we've talked about. And within that, I think all of these slides have become available, so I'm not going to read all the bits on them, but there were differences in all of the groups. And as I've said, we have a homogenous title for BAME, but within that there are so many differences of attainment, of experiences, of opportunities. And you can see here that different students experience their opportunities at university and their journeys quite differently. And of course, each of the faculties operate differently. And that doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means that they operate differently. So we need to think differently in each of those spaces. So because of all of that evaluation, Decolonizing DMU was launched as a work streams of 5 work streams, as you can see them there. And you can see the arrow that runs across the bottom, where they are all interconnected. They are not single entities of their own. They are interconnected. And very importantly, the Race Equality Charter sits within that and amongst all of that, because that's the space by which we are really interrogating our outcomes within our university. And Decolonizing DMU allows that framework of mindset change and moving forwards. So if we just look 1 year onwards, the Decolonizing DMU, like I said, it's about a year old. And in the institutional work stream, kind of looked at structures, cultures, and practices. We're aligning with the Race Equality Charter, the Access and Participation Plan. We're looking at university policies and trying to understand the impact of racism and talking about whiteness and privilege. And it's about decolonizing the self and the mind, as well as the institution, and hearing narratives and stories. The staff development route is looking at developing the community of practice that we've got up and running, and developing and building that curriculum toolkit, and working with Kai on an expert group to look at that. We're running briefing sessions. We've got a partnering model with faculties and directorates. So lots of activity to start and to continue to engage people. Students, I'm going to talk a little bit more about students. I'm not going to talk much here, but students are, we're doing a lot of partnership working, looking at tackling racism, microaggressions. And I put bounce back ability because that's what the group Unapologetically BAME have been working with the students on, in terms of COVID has damaged a lot of people's resilience, and they're using the word of bounce back ability to get the students regenerated and build that resilience back up. Our library and learning services have been absolutely key in working with us, not just on our library collections, but also on staff development, on read to debate sessions, on looking at the place and space where our students learn, who uses those places and spaces, and research, key. We've done things the way we've done them because of what we've learned about through our evaluation. And then what we're learning and what we're developing, we're looking to move forward in terms of writing, bidding, to be able to enhance the work we're doing furthermore. So we wanted to put those priorities into a survey to see how things were going, and you'll be able to see the numbers are so different from the previous survey. And I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that, as Richard was saying, COVID has hit very hard on all of us. And therefore, this type of work and any type of work is so much harder in the digital environment. And those numbers came through. People were struggling with all sorts. But what our survey did do with the numbers that we did get did reflect what had erupted through Black Lives Matter, and included a concrete focus upon equality, explicit working to tackle discrimination, looking at disciplinary processes, which is really important for staff and students, representation inside and outside the classroom, and developing conversations around harassment and discrimination. So, moving on from that original survey, it's still there. The same themes are still there. The work is still on track. The staff perspective on that was they continued to highlight many different factors, but biases, deficit thinking and denial were part of them. So we asked a number of the staff who've been to many of our workshops their thoughts and how the workshops, how Decolonizing DMU were helping them to get their heads around what to do. So there's a variety there. Some people are finding it useful. They need to look at different ways. And some people are, I still don't get the decolonizing and anti-racism elements and unconscious bias. So, it's a journey that we're working through. We've done a lot of work with students, and for them, Decolonizing DMU, and this is from them, which I'm just presenting on their behalf, it's certainly about raising awareness across the student body, creating those spaces and student-led activities, engagement on campus, which at the moment is difficult. Our digital engagement with students has been challenging, as we all know, because of COVID. Bear with me, I'm just trying to get bits right. These were some quotes that we'd got from students where, again, it's the same sort of thing. They're saying they want to have the people that can make the change in the conversation. They want to be able to talk about race. They want to bring their lecturers into those conversations. They want a decolonized reading list. They don't want to feel like they're on a one-year trial and that they're stereotyped. That's how they feel, and we obviously need to be conscious of that. The Unapologetically BAME group set some views out for us in terms of what they thought was important. And at the top, they put conversations about race and racism should not be an option and should be compulsory. And students need to see themselves reflected. But I find really interesting, 2 of our ambassadors talked about the times that they thought about quitting uni, but that the project enabled them to feel that they were doing something right for themselves and they felt valued. And I thought that was really key, that students could feel that they were part of the university. I've just put this slide up because the library have been absolutely cracking. They've worked brilliantly with this, and Kay, who's our Libraries Fair outcome champion, and Samaya as well, who've been working really hard, have done some fantastic work. They're doing a workshop later, so you might want to go to their workshop. And we've got so many resources that have been set up in the 12 months that we've been working on the project, and there's a link there, so please certainly go and have a look at those. Now, research is, as I keep saying, is key. So what I've listed here is we've got 4 priorities that we're working on: evaluating the impact of the work streams, initiating research projects in what DDMU means, analysing our research institutions and the environment. And we want to engage fully with our research centres and institutions to look at the fantastic work that they're doing, see how it feeds into Decolonizing DMU, and to be able to support and celebrate them as much as they need or want. The work flags discussions around decolonizing, around working with PhD students, international work, and kind of we kind of tend to articulate a link between the communities made marginal, obviously, as we know, but all of the research sits with, a lot of the research we do in the institution sits within that framework, and recognizes the differences of impact that they might be having on the different communities that their research will be reaching. So I speak very quickly towards the end now. When we set this up, there were some issues around, well, is this the right thing to do? Is the language the right language? Is it too bold? Is it too in your face? And those of you who know me very much felt that we needed to have something that generated the conversations. But obviously there were risks identified, concerns. Would using the language or going down with an initiative around decolonizing an institution, would there be a culture impact on, surfacing latent racism, increase of race-related incidents? This is around the time of Brexit as well. Lack of institutional understanding around white privilege and fragility. Student staff fears of being accused of racism. Does the institution have emotional resilience? And then in terms of the business case, will this create a problem? Will this put staff and students off? Is this just a buzzword? Are we going to forget about it and it's going to disappear? But opposite to that were the hopes, the opportunities, that it's bold, it's recognizing the existence of institutional racism, centering our debate, our obligation as an institution to have open debate and allowing a broader range of voices to be heard, building those relationships, creating those spaces to hear the lived experiences of staff and students, and recognizing we have a phenomenally fantastic diverse population, and working with that and enabling those people and holding ourselves as an institution accountable to actively build an anti-racist university. So I'm coming to the end now. Chris, you'll be pleased to know. Defining decolonization. There were just a few points that we put here. Diversifying the syllabus and the canon, decentering knowledge and knowledge production away from the global north, not forgetting about it, but adding to it. So it's not the center, it's part of what we learn. Devaluing hierarchies and revaluing relationality, which is so important, and diminishing some voices and opinions that have predominated, not get rid of them, but bringing them to a space which allows other voices that have been marginalized to be heard. Now, the most important thing, well, one of the most important things, recognition that this is not going to happen overnight. We get asked the question constantly, what does it look like when you've decolonized, and when will you be decolonized? I can't answer that question truthfully and honestly, because it's a long and slow journey. There are a lot of people that need to be educated about racism and its impact on themselves, on society, and on our institution. It's not an easy subject to talk about. It's challenging, but it's important. We've seen that certainly over these last 12 months. We need to create, you've heard my alarm telling me nearly done. We need to create the places and the spaces for the conversations that are essential. We need to be absolutely clear that this is an institutional-wide approach. It's not just academic staff. It's our professional services community. It's our leaders, our managers. It's our senior teams. It's our governors. We all need to be working on this together. And it allows us to bring what could be a paper document, the Race Equality Charter, to life, to actually effect change and create much better outcomes for all of our community. So just the last couple of slides, I've talked very quickly through a lot. And when I was told I had 30 minutes, I was thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to fill that. Clearly, I was wrong. And I hope you've got something out of this. But just the last bit, opportunities to engage and influence. Everybody will be getting involved one way or another, because we'll be touching all parts of the university. But if you want to be engaged to influence how the project works and where it's going, we have a community of practice. We are developing and setting up the DMU and Kai expert group around developing the toolkit. We run regular workshops, drop-in sessions, and we've just started a partnering model with professional services, and with the faculties will come next. We'll be running some upcoming listening sessions for our BAME staff, which will soon be followed with ones for our students, and dates will be confirmed. And we'll also be running some workshops, some roadshows around Decolonizing DMU and the Race Equality Charter and how they overlay with each other, just so that people can get their heads around it. And if you want to contact the team, there are ways. So we have an email address that you can contact us on. When you get this, we have a podcast. There are 4 podcasts on there. Please go and listen to them. They are brilliant. Staff, students, projects that we've done. We have a website which we're working on developing, and we have a Twitter handle as well. So there are different ways that you can follow us and find out about us and what we're doing. So that's everything from me. Apologies for speeding through those last few bits. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you got quite a lot out of it in preparation for the sessions that are next. And I look forward to seeing you digitally and in person on campus at some point to continue the journey of decolonizing our university. So thank you very much.